Assalamu alaikum, namaskar to our friends from Pakistan, from India, wider communities. Today we're going to have a lecture by Professor Pervez Hoodbhoy, who's come from Pakistan. He's doing a tour of lectures here in the UK, London, Birmingham, and a few other places, which he can maybe speak about. The way this is going to happen is the professor is going to speak for about 30 minutes, give and take a few minutes, and then there will be a question and answer session. This is the start of, hopefully if everything goes right, a series of lectures that we're looking at doing. Another lecture we've got in mind is next month by Professor Joel Haywood, who's going to be talking about war and strategy at the time of the Prophet Muhammad. But let's begin, first of all, with Professor Pervez Hoodbhoy. Professor Hoodbhoy, do you want to...
Oh, yes, thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Basi, for arranging this talk, and thanks to the Association of British Muslims. I thought I'd just spend a few minutes talking about the subject, which is Islam and science, so that we can have a discussion. I'd like it to be a two-way traffic rather than me lecturing. And so let me say the obvious, that the modern world is due to science. It's everything around us, everything from this camera to the mobile phone over here to the lights, everything, it's from there. Now, science is not the creation of any one civilization. In fact, if you go back and look at how science has developed over the centuries, over the eons, the first recorded instance of a civilization developing science is that of the ancient Egyptians. So that's about 6,000 years ago. And then you have the Babylonians, the Chinese, the Indian civilization, Greeks, and from the Greeks, the Muslims. And it will be Muslim science, which will be the subject of our discussion today. And then Muslim science gives birth to modern science, the science that we today learn in schools, colleges, universities, and with which we make all our inventions, all our technology. So with this little background, let's ask how science entered Muslim civilization. There was none at the time of the Holy Prophet, who died in 638. It took 150 years after his death for Muslims to expand. They expanded on the one side towards India. 712 was when Muhammad bin Qasim came to Sindh, Pakistan. And on the other side, they expanded all the way up till Spain. So in the next 150 years, you had a massive expansion of Islam, but that expansion also took place northwards, and that was where, let's open that up for them. You can come from the other side. Yeah. So that expansion, which was towards Baghdad, towards what is modern day Iraq, brought them into contact with the treasures of Greek learning. So introduced the works of Plato, Aristotle, of Democritus, of Pythagoras, and Greek logic, and so forth. Now all that was in Greek, and the first effort was towards translating this from Greek into Arabic. And the translators were not Muslim, they were Christians, they were Nestorians, Jews. And once that translation happened, it piqued the curiosity of the rulers. The rulers were caliphs who were enlightened, who were of a mind that different cultures brought together would create new knowledge. And so it was in that spirit that the translations were done. And now initially it was just translation. It was trying to understand what the Greeks had done, but then it went way beyond that. It went into innovation. So between the 9th and the 13th centuries, what you see is Islamic civilization doing fantastically well. You see that It produced many great physicians, geographers, travelers. It produced mathematicians, it produced physicists, chemists, and there were names that every Pakistani child, every Arab child is familiar with. People like Al-Farabi, Ibn Sina, Ibn al-Hasham, said in slightly different words, but yeah, all those, there's a pantheon of them. And in fact, there are some very important discoveries that were made, and those discoveries, such as that of Hasham, it's a fantastic discovery that light will go from one point to another point, taking the least amount of time. Which is okay, if you think of just empty space, but what if there are different mediums? Well, then it's not at all clear that it'll take the least amount of time, but that's what gives you the law of refraction. Al-Khwarizmi invents algebra, and it's not in the algebra quite in the form what we see today, but it was the beginnings of symbolic algebra, representing things by symbols and then learning the rules by which they can be manipulated, and so forth. Well, all this goes on, and it goes on with the open-minded liberal caliphs in charge, and there you have Jews, Christians, Nestorians, Muslims all working together. Now, here I must tell you of philosophical currents which are very important to understand, because without them this transformation could never have happened in a tribal, in a desert culture. That transformation was due to Greek logic being absorbed, and it had an enormous effect upon Muslims of that time, who said, hey, now we can start to understand the world around us using our mental faculties, our reasoning abilities. And then they started rethinking major theological issues, like that of whether life is determined from you from the outset, and they rejected pure determinism. Pure determinism says that it's your ismat, it's your fate that you are to be this or you are to be that. You're born in that social station, you're going to remain there forever. They said, no, man is in charge of himself. God has given him enough mental powers to understand his situation, to move ahead. And the people who thought like this, they became known as the Mu'tazila. And the Mu'tazila was supported by the like-minded caliphs of those times, people like Harun al-Rashid, al-Mamun, and others in Spain. And as long as the Mu'tazila were on top, science in Islam flourished. And flourished, as I said, for a good 400 years or so. But there were challenges to it. And the challenge came from the orthodoxy, which said that man is feeble, he is incapable of knowing what will happen, he is, the most important thing is faith, and they chose to interpret the Quran literally. So there were many theological disputes that happened between them. Mu'tazilism also became a political creed, because the secular, the liberal caliphs were also people who were power hungry, and so it became a power struggle. It became ugly. There was blood that was shed in Baghdad, and what one sees is that over time the Mu'tazilas weakened, and they were dealt a death blow not by the political opposition, but by the philosophical opposition as well, and that is the coming of an Imam Al-Ghazali, who today is viewed with great reverence and is seen as the man who broke the back of the rationalists. So a little bit about him, which mostly is criticism that was made by Averroes. Averroes in Arabic is Ibn Rushd. And Ibn Rushd was the last great philosophical rationalist. So he came about 50 years after Al-Ghazali. From his work we learn what Ghazali's main points were. And Ghazali's main points I will summarize to you, and you'll see how they were so destructive of science and how they were to close the doors for further progress of Muslims. He didn't like mathematics. He says, okay, mathematics is maybe not irreligious, but it gives you a sense of intoxication. You do too much math, you think everything can be done by math, and then it makes you go a little cuckoo, and then you start losing your faith. And once there's too much logic and you start figuring out everything and become too rational, your faith goes out of the window. So that's one thing, but the most important thing that he did was to break the connection between cause and effect. So you see, everything that we see around us is a physical phenomena, and every physical phenomenon has a physical reason to it. So you see outside over here, this room over here, you'll see all these gadgets over here that over the last 100 years were made to further the progress of science. And there, a cause gives rise to an effect. Now, to give you a very simple example of that, when electricity flows through a wire, it gets hot. So the cause is the flow of electricity, and the effect is the heating of the wire. Now, let me go back to Al-Ghazali. And this is literally what he said. And this is quoted in Ibn Rushd's book, which in Arabic is called Tahaft al-Falasifa. And this was written in reaction to Al-Ghazali's book, which is called Tahaft al-Falasifa. Tahaft means rejection, falasifa, philosopher. So rejection of the philosophers. Who were the philosophers? People like Ibn Sina, Al-Razi, Al-Farabi. Those were people who had taken in, absorbed Greek learning and sought to meld that with Islamic teachings, with the Quran. So Ghazali deconstructed that and broke them into pieces using his theological reasoning. Okay, so that was the Tahaft al-Falasifa. Now, Ibn Rushd looks at that and writes his book, Rejection of the Rejection of Philosophers, and he gives us several examples. And one of them is this, that suppose you have a piece of cotton and you apply a match to it and the cotton burns, and you think that it's you who has burnt that piece of cotton. No, that's not true. It's God who has sent in the angels who have burnt that piece of cotton. So you do not become the cause. The cause is God. There's only one cause, and that's God, and He has sent in the angels. So forget it, boy. You are not capable of doing anything. Example number 2. You think that by eating a piece of bread, you get a nice feeling in your belly. But it's not that piece of bread which gives you that nice feeling over there. It's actually God's angels who have been sent there for the purpose of giving you that feeling. And now, another example, and I won't give you too many examples. Imagine an arrow that is speeding towards its target. It's here. You say, will it hit the target? Yeah. Closer, you're even more certain. But no matter how close it gets to its target, you cannot say it will hit the target because that's up to God. And so Ghazali said that God creates the universe in an instant, and he destroys it in the very next instant, and then recreates it, and etc., etc. So there is no continuity in time. Time is instead to be thought of as slices. And so you cannot say whether that will hit the target or not. You have no power of prediction. Now, if you don't have power of prediction, then you don't do science. You can't do science. Now, some people say that Al-Ghazali is wrongly blamed, that it can't be one person who did it. And they say, you haven't read this and you haven't read that, and if you read it all, you won't criticize Al-Ghazali. But I'm not criticizing Al-Ghazali. I'm saying this is a point of view. This is what he wrote. This is how he was quoted by Averroes, who was, by the way, a judge, a jurist, and the author of several books, and this is in one of his books. But look at the amount of influence that this had on the Muslims of that time and subsequent generations. So let me fast forward to 1981. This is the time when General Ziaul Haq seizes power in Pakistan and completely reorganizes Pakistan's history books, all its educational curriculum, and the science curriculum as well. And so there is a religious organization in Pakistan called the Jamaat-e-Islami, which put out a series of textbooks of how to teach science. And one of them was on the teaching of chemistry, and it was titled, I don't know how many of you will be able to understand, but it said, Kimia ki tadris ka nazariyati pehlu. So the ideological basis of teaching chemistry in an Islamic way. And it says many things over there, but one of them is, I think I found particularly interesting, is that you should not teach students that if hydrogen and oxygen are brought together, they will form water. Because by doing so, you will have given students the impression as though it is the blind forces of nature that are actually doing this. Instead, you should teach students that when you bring hydrogen and oxygen together, then by the order of God Almighty, they turn into water, etc. So complete denial of causality. All right, of course, nobody teaches science that way anymore. I mean, that was just a blip, you could say. But the notion that it is God who constantly intervenes in our daily affairs has now achieved, is now total in Pakistan, in many Muslim societies. And we routinely say, Inshallah. Inshallah means by the will of God. Or Mashallah, it's through God's grace that this happened. And the forces of nature have been entirely pushed out, thrown out of the window. Just to give you a small instance, 3 days ago when I was in Islamabad, coming from Lahore, the bus driver says, and it's very, very routine, Inshallah, we will be reaching the bus depot. The bus depot is just across over there, just where that building is over there. Well, hang on. Are we paying you or are we paying Allah to drive the bus? Why do you need to say inshallah? It's you who are in charge of that. It's you who is holding the wheel. It can go on and on. Like, look, what happens to this? What will happen if I release it? It'll fall?
Inshallah, it will.
Yeah. Do I need to say that? I don't really. And that doesn't mean that I deny God. I simply say, not I, but modern civilization simply says that it will fall to the ground and it will fall at a rate which is determined by Newton's laws. It's not Newton who made those laws, it was God who made those laws, but it's Newton who discovered them, okay? So, for heaven's sakes, give God a little bit of credit for making for making those laws. Then if some Tom, Dick or Harry or Einstein discovers those laws, that's a separate thing altogether. The fatalism and the belief that God constantly intervenes has been enormously destructive of science in Islam. But it's not just this one theological point, it's how we educate our young. Now, if you look at all the great scientists that Islam has produced, not one single one of them came from a madrasa. They were all men of very high intellectual capability, geniuses you could say, and they looked around them and they found naturally explanations for physical phenomena. They were able to open up bodies, look at blood circulation, this, that. That's because they were damned smart. And every civilization has had smart people. The Hindus have had a lot of smart people. The Greeks had, the Greeks produced some fantastic mathematicians and thinkers and philosophers and doctors and whatever. So those are natural capabilities that somehow we humans are gifted with. All right, God gifted them to us. But the fact is that every civilization will have geniuses within. Of course, if the geniuses are suppressed, if they're punished, then that civilization will not have the capacity. Why am I emphasizing the madrasas? Because that was the traditional way by which Muslims were educated, and it remains the traditional way by which Muslims are educated today. Modernity has made an impact, and it made an impact 200 years ago in Egypt, particularly Egypt, then Turkey, Iran, and it came to the Indian subcontinent as well. But some key elements of traditional education, Islamic education, have persisted, and they remain an obstacle to Muslims entering into the modern age. So the emphasis on rote memorization. All of us who are Muslims here have from a very early age learnt verses of the Quran without understanding a single word of what they mean. I don't know, those who speak Arabic might know a little bit, but not for us who are mere parrots and go, like that. Well, we learn that, but what good does it do to us? It doesn't do anything. And then the notion that all wisdom, all science is contained in the Quran is so pervasive and has given birth to absurdities that simply boggle the mind. Let me give you an example of a few years ago. I was on television with a very famous preacher. His name was Maulana Ihtaramul Haq Thanvi. And he was the son of an even more famous preacher, Maulana Ihtashamul Haq Thanvi. So he and I are on television, and the host asks him, and he says, these Yahud, Hanud, the Jews and these Hindus, they've gone so far ahead. What's happening to us Muslims? So Maulana Etaramul Haq Thanvi says, and he said all this in Urdu, so I'm trying to translate. He said, you don't know what these Western scientists do before, just as they wake up. They don't tell anyone, but they go and they read a copy of the Quran before going to their labs. And before they go to sleep, they read it again. And we Muslims, we have forgotten the Quran. And so if we Muslims come back to the faith, we'll be even better than them. It's their secret reading. Now, this is a man who influences millions of people. Of course, I had my say, and it wasn't a pleasant conversation, but I won't go into that. What we have seen in Muslim countries now is that there has been an attempt, a half-hearted attempt, to marry the traditional with the modern kind of education that you will find here at the University of Birmingham. The same sort of stuff that they teach in the room next door. But it's half-hearted, because that science is taught in a way that you memorize facts, you memorize formulae, diagrams. The same sort of questions come as are present in your textbook. There's no challenge. And here is a real epistemological problem. You see, when you think that knowledge is already there, it's preformed, and it's present in your holy books, then why go and try and invent new knowledge? In fact, I don't know about Arabic, but in Urdu and in Farsi, there is no word for the invention of knowledge. There is tahsil-e-ilm, ilm hasil karna.
In Arabic there is.
Huh?
In Arabic there is.
There is?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but I can invent now in Urdu as well. I can call it ईजाद. हाँ, ईजाद. लेकिन आप इल्म ईजाद नहीं करते ना. हाँ, आप इल्म हासिल करते हैं. तो ये मसला है. अभी now in the present age we will say ईजाद या तख्लीक. Would you say takhliq?
No, I would say ikhtira, which is a word used by Emir al-Qais some 1600 years ago.
1600 years?
Yes, before the Quran.
Ah, okay.
And it's still used in Arabic.
All right. I defer to your knowledge of Arabic, but certainly the concept of knowledge, traditional knowledge, was that it's all there, and man cannot be the creator of knowledge. You see, that's the whole problem. And in fact, that has been the epistemological barrier. Okay, I'm going to stop over here, but let me say that these were all issues that were present 200 years ago as well. There were reformers which came in the Arab world, reformers which came to Turkey, there were reformers which came to the Indian subcontinent. You had in Turkey philosophers like Ziya Gökalp. In the Arab world you had Rashid Rida. In the Indian subcontinent you had Sayyid Ahmad Khan, and I'll say that the boldest one amongst them was Sayyid Ahmad Khan. Before I finish, let me give you his prescription for joining Islam and science together. So he said, they call him a modern Mu'tazilite. Well, he's been dead for 150 years, but he's still modern. He said, I absolutely believe that the Quran is the word of God. It's as he dictated it. I'm not challenging the Quran at all, he said. So Sayyid Ahmad Khan says that the Prophet breaking the moon in two, what is called Shaqul Qamar, I think it's the same in Arabic, yeah? He says it didn't really happen.
No, it didn't.
That's what Sayyid Ahmad Khan. Oh, look, I am not saying anything, my lips are sealed. He said, it was not really Noah's Ark. It was impossible. How do you fit in all the animals in the world onto an ark? And what will they eat anyway, except other animals? So how could you put all of them over there? That Adam and Eve, no, they weren't. And this is the time at Darwin that he came along. So Darwin was his contemporary, actually, Sayyid Ahmad Khan. And he says, okay, so in that case, what we do is we understand the Quran in metaphorical and allegorical terms, not literal terms. Now, this is the one man who gave a radically new interpretation of Islamic theology. Of course, he brought upon himself the ire of the theologians, of the clerics, and there were, I don't know if it's true or not, but they say there were 5,555 fatwas of kufr against him. Anyway, because he had protection of the British, and because he was such a strong advocate of Muslim rights, he was protected, and he's now recognized as one of the founders of Pakistan. Okay, now he had an impact, but he didn't have a big enough impact. And even today in Pakistan and in Arab countries across the world, what you see is that science is taught in a way that's totally different from how it is taught in Western countries, or in Vietnam, or in Hong Kong, or in China, or elsewhere. Bottom line is, if the Muslim world wishes to be part of modern humanity, of being alongside those who create new science, technology, who wish to go to Mars and beyond, who wish to understand how to cure diseases, well, they can't live with a 7th century mentality. You have to have a 21st century mentality to deal with 21st century problems. Is that happening? Well, one sees elements of change, but not much more. You see in places regression, like in my country, with Imran Khan making the single national curriculum, which has now made our regular schools into madrasas. But in other places, you see actually definite improvement. So I was in Morocco and then Algeria. Algeria, I didn't see much of a difference, but Morocco, I did see that the way they're teaching kids is different from how they're teaching them in Pakistan. Afghanistan, of course, is now totally a different country. Forget that. We can't even talk about that. I was also impressed when I went to Singapore. Now, Singapore is not a Muslim country, but it's got a big Muslim population, 17% or so. And I was a guest of the Madrasa Mahajirin. And there they're trying to get the kids to compete with kids who are in the regular Singaporean curriculum and doing their O-levels, etc. At the same time, they're madrasa kids, and the boys and girls both in the same madrasa. I met them, I met their teachers. I won't say it's going very well, but I'll tell you why, because they split between that and that. They can't give enough time to the Singaporean curriculum because that needs a lot of concentration. But they're doing okay. Now Saudi Arabia, we hear, is changing drastically. If it is, I've never been there, then that's a good thing. The same one here is for the UAE. So in portions, there is recognition of change. in portions there's not. Just one last thing before I finish. Something very different about Iran. It's a theocracy. But the amazing thing is that the way they teach science over there is quite similar to how they teach science here or in America. I saw the theory of evolution being taught over there. I went there for a mathematical physics conference, and I was flipping the pages of the textbooks over there and saw that, well, here's it's called Nazriya Irtaqa. I said, well, how can you teach this over there? He said, what's your problem? I said, well, this is kufr. So it turns out that they had a long debate at the time that Khomeini was alive, and he said, there's no such thing as Islamic mathematics, there's no such thing as Islamic science, they can coexist. And so that country is different, Turkey is different, although now one can't say what will happen to Turkey. Okay, thank you. I've taken too much time.
Question. So who's first? Okay, the chap at the back.
Yeah, thank you.
Good evening, Professor. First, I apologize for being late. It was a bit complicated.
And you didn't realize that you had to come from there.
Yeah, that's right. So
Okay.
I do apologize. My name is Hak. I am from Dialogue Society. It's a charity where we are promoting intercultural and interfaith, activities. So I've got a couple of questions, very quick questions. I'm originally from Turkey. Father of algebra is known as Khwarizmi, and Islam actually, I believe that Islam is self-promoting and encouraging science. However, it is not really considered in many Muslim societies. But my first question, how could you describe and interpret that religion and science can never come along?
I didn't say they could never come along. They are still coming along even in the West. But there's a condition for that. You've got to make a very clear separation between the spiritual and the material. You cannot expect that the creator of the universe will, on your behest, change the laws of physics for even a fraction of a second. No matter how earnestly I pray, this bottle will always fall down, it will never go up. Okay, so that's the condition right at the very beginning. A clear separation of the two. Science will not give you all answers to all questions. It won't tell you what is the purpose of life, how you should live your life. Might tell you a few elementary things about what you should not do, like don't kill the people around you. Okay, that's elementary. It comes from, it's a rule that we can see exists in evolutionary biology. If we start killing people around us, well, then there'll be nobody to help us kill animals so that we can fill our bellies and so forth. But by and large, I don't believe ethics can be derived from science. The purpose of life can be discovered through science. So it has limitations. Keep them apart and you're okay.
Yeah.
Okay, the guy with the hat.
My second question, sorry, last question. Well, I've got one more, but I will just pick one. Is there any specific organization or initiatives that you believe are making positive strides in promoting science and critical thinking, like yourself, within Islamic communities?
There are 1.8 billion Muslims. I can't say anything about what's happening in other countries, even in most parts of Pakistan, but I do know that within a very narrow community, where I live, people have made institutions, or at least one institution. I'm sort of involved with that. It's called the Black Hole. And that's where everything gets discussed, where science is taught. as with the idea of discovering things and of actually investigating the physical world. So I'm sure there are lots of such things everywhere, elsewhere in the Muslim world, but I'm not aware of that. I don't see any organized movement towards that end. In India, there is, or rather there used to be, and it was under Nehru. Jawaharlal Nehru was the first Prime Minister of India. And he introduced the idea of scientific temper. And it's actually a part of the Indian Constitution. And I'd love to see scientific temper entering into the constitution of Muslim countries, any Muslim country.
Right, yeah. And my last question, very quick. I think this is the most important
The
thing.
Muslim is 3 questions.
Yeah, last question. Sorry. As I believe that we have some young people here, so what advice would you offer to young Muslims who are interested in pursuing their careers in science while maintaining their religious beliefs and values? My last question.
Keep an open mind.
Yeah.
Look for truth, look for evidence. Don't be guided by preconceptions. Keep your curiosity alive. Read a lot of books. Watch a lot of solid videos made by or on great scientists. Things like that which are pretty obvious.
Thank you, Professor.
Suraj, and
Yeah,
Fadil.
thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
One question. So I think you mentioned keeping science and religion apart, perhaps. You also mentioned the Constitution. So one question about policy discourse. Do you think it helps to perhaps channel more energy and policy in terms of science and technology on the infrastructure and economic development and the talent pipeline? And perhaps we detach ourselves from the discourse around religion and science, because I can't help but thinking that it sort of imposes a baggage that we kind of can't escape, certainly in countries like Pakistan. Whereas if I see countries that have developed over the last 30 years or so, including countries in East Asia and particularly India, where that kind of rigor and focus on science and technology has contributed significantly to economic development, which in itself then helps societal development, but keeping the discourse and the narrative around science purely around, beyond religion, around societal and economic development. Well, do you think that's sensible? Because I just think we're missing a trick here, perhaps.
This is exactly what Korea and Vietnam and the East Asian countries have done, China as well. And they didn't allow theological issues to intrude upon matters of simple learning. I mean, why do the stars shine and why do they flicker or appear to flicker? You could say, oh, that's because God wanted it, wants it. But then you don't search for, you don't look for reasons that it's the atmosphere which is of uneven density, and that's why the flickering appears to happen. So that, as long as the child is told that these are purely scientific questions, whose answer is discoverable, maybe not immediately, but at some later point, his interest, her interest, will then carry forward when that kid goes to college and thereafter. To say that, oh, you must learn science because it's good for the economic development of the country, a kid isn't going to be convinced by that. He is naturally curious about this, that, and that. Why is the sky blue? Why leaves green?
So just to understand, so I think what you're saying is inherent value, not just instrumental value of science that we should accept, which I agree with. I'm just saying that we should perhaps position that.
Yeah, look, I think the way the human brain is structured, we are naturally curious, and that has a great advantage. You see, that way we get to explore our environment and then learn and then extract rules of behavior and then use those rules of behavior to then benefit ourselves in some way.
You know, the gentleman asked the third question about, young Muslims and the religion itself, Islam and science. Now, when you said there's no word in Urdu called invention, so in religiously, it's saying that you can't ask why. And invention in science is all about asking why. It's a big contradiction between the religion and science itself. So how would you motivate the young people? Because once they start the perception of asking questions and finding the truth and finding the answers why, then, with the religious mentality, it stops you from asking questions like why. You can't question. So how do you answer that?
Okay, when you use the word religious mentality, there can be an extremely, there can be a mind that is completely fixated on matters of religion. And then on the other side can be a mind which says, yeah, religion's fine and I'll go say my prayers, but it doesn't really matter to me in my daily life. So that's the pragmatic way of doing things. So let's take the issue of driving on the left versus driving on the right. The Taliban, when they took over a part of Pakistan, Swat, they said driving on the left is un-Islamic because the left hand is not you don't do things with your left. So everybody should drive on the right. What we learned from the British, rightly or wrongly, that you drive on the left. And so what happened was that some were driving on the left, some on the right, and bang, bang, bang. It kept happening. If you say, hey, look, our religion, Islam, is not about driving on the left or the right, or it's not getting into issues like that. It's about, doing good things and being nice to your neighbor and hukukul ibad, that sort of thing. So then so that's a different religious mentality. Keep the two apart. Be pragmatic in your approach. And look, most Muslims are pragmatic. How many Muslims use banking? Banking, I'd say, I don't know, what's your guess? 90%? 95%?
99%.
99%. Okay. As of 50 years ago, what percentage was there of Muslims who would go to a bank, agree to put their money in a bank? Much, much smaller. In fact, the first Muslim bank that was, so the first bank in Europe was in 1400 and something, around the time of the printing press. So what you did is you went, put your money in that bank, and then you got interest from that, and the normal banking. The first bank that was allowed in Islam was in Turkey, and that was 1700 and something. 300 years later. Okay, and then 2% of Muslims must be using banking. Now you say 99%. So rules change over time. People have become pragmatic. They say, yeah, we are Muslims, we believe in Islam. And there's nothing really wrong about banks. But there is. Banks are very wrong. Banks is riba. Riba is haram. And in fact, Maulana Maududi, who I consider who is a major ideologue, he said, Sood, riba, is more haram than zina. Zina is fornication. All that has changed. Muslims are pragmatic. They now take pictures of themselves. For hundreds of years, there was no art, no depiction of the human face in Islam. Now everybody wants to make selfies of themselves. So things change. Muslims have changed. It's just that they're not changing fast enough. That's really the problem. We learn everything that everybody else has learned, but after a while. That has to be shortened, yeah.
Uh, can you please shed some light on how the Mu'tazila movement actually formed? Like, what were the factors that enabled it to start? And like, is it possible for such a movement to develop organically in Muslim countries today? And what would be the factors, the environment that would be needed for that?
So the Mu'tazila movement was born 800 and something, and it is about 150 years after the Prophet's death. And the man who founded it, Vasik, anyone remember? Anyway, he was influenced by Greek thought and influenced others, and they had a kind of a study group, and that study group grew and grew until it reached important people and ultimately the Caliph. And yeah, they said we can reconcile Islam and Islam and reason. So they were the rationalists of Islam. Can it be redone today? I think these are very different times. First of all, Greek knowledge was very primitive compared to what we have today. Now we have much more knowledge. And I think that various religions have worked out some kind of an accommodation with science. So look at Judaism or Christianity or Hinduism. Hinduism belongs to a different genre, so does Buddhism. But religions have managed to find some kind of an accommodation with the real world. And so answer is, yeah, there will be people who will believe more in reason within Islam. They'll have to make definite choices and say that these are true Islamic principles and the rest is stuff that has been overtaken by time.
And thank you for really what I call fresh thinking and fresh approach, which is much needed. Don't you think actually I want to invent a word which you did not use, the problematic or the conservative way we look at religion, the way we allow between two brackets religion to prevent free thinking and open mind is delivering actually a service to sustain and maintain political establishments. Because as you said earlier, human mind is curious. And if you leave it alone, it will eventually discover that there is, that bottle of water is going to fall. And the sun does not, the earth is not the center of the universe, and I'm not the most important thing in this universe. I'm just happen to be here, and the world wasn't created in 7 days and all this. But all this delivers service to the rulers, to the politicians. And you said it earlier, that Al-Ghazali was at the time when he came with his famous statement, "May God give me the belief of my grandmother." He was at conflict himself. I think Al-Ghazali probably, if we are to be true to the man, he's probably deep inside him. He did not believe anything he said because he could not logically argue his case with himself. So he wanted the belief of his grandmother. I think the problem lies within the sustainability, the delivery of the religious establishment, of a sustainability of a political establishment, which is increasingly corrupt and increasingly unjust and single-handed and undemocratic and does not represent the interest of the people. And if, on the other hand, science is prepared people for the free thinking, the rejection of volume, or the rejection of abuse, or the rejection of inequality, which science by definition is egalitarian and would encourage equality. There is the problem here. If we look 70 years ago, before these, 70 years ago there was more science in Pakistan than now. 70 years ago there was much, much, much more science in Egypt or in Syria than what we have now. I think the problem lies within the current political establishment, which is unfortunately, one way or another, is sustained by the countries which teach science as we learn it here in Birmingham or in Manchester. So there is some sort of beneficiaries of the status quo, and this is the problem. And if we don't identify it as the problem, and we will enter into a conflict which we don't need. I had the privilege of working with a very famous scientist long time ago, who is of a Pakistani origin, Professor Salam, who was a Nobel laureate. And he won Nobel Prize in physics, but he was a religious man. And when we had our challenges, he said, look, I don't want to force down your throat my beliefs. You just be a free thinker, and that was the deal. And the problem is free thinking will undermine government. And government would want us to stay where we are. That's the problem. It's a sausage machine which we need to remove.
I think you have a very valid point over there, that free thinking then gets people's minds too free, and so then they start asking, hey, why are we being ruled by this establishment over here? It's not to our benefit, and so then they become insurrectionaries. Okay, this is particularly true for those countries which are rent-seeking, meaning that they're not involved in industrial production. They don't need to have factories. They don't need to have efficient organizations. They have some source of revenue. That revenue could be oil. It could be some natural resource. It could be geographical location, which was the case for Pakistan because, hey, we happened to be just at the right place when the Soviets walked in, and we knew that if we have a jihad against the Soviets, the Americans will throw bales of dollars down from the sky, and which they did for years and years. And how many tens of billions of dollars did we get for that? So oil, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, all of those are rent-seeking countries. Now, in those places, then if you have thinking people, then they're a danger to the establishment. What one was seeing now in Saudi Arabia, however, is very interesting because they know that rent-seeking is going to run out after a while, the oil is going to go. So it's time to get the population educated. And yeah, so what I know you're shaking your head and you're right about that, but they've given some minimal liberties which are everybody's rights anyway. But do they want that real kind of thinking people? No, that I would agree with you on. However, the stability of governments is what the stability of their own rule is what they're mostly worried about.
So, those three caps. So, yeah. And then we'll come back. I'll do that.
So disclaimer, I'm no scholar, and thanks very much. It was an interesting talk by Professor. So just highlighting about, I believe, from my dharma, Sanatana Dharma inherently allows to question and choose the path out of understanding, one's understanding, intellect, and choices. But do you think the lack of allowing to question and expand on one's curiosity acts as a deterrent within, say, Islam? And how can we change this? As there is a block in thinking and instilling fear with the concept of, say, haram or hell, don't do this, or you should not think in one direction, just this is the only where
work of values, of telling you how you must live your life. It's not a work of science. You cannot ever, by studying the Quran, discover some new physical fact, make a new machine, devise a new experiment. That's not possible. But it'll tell you how to get to heaven. That is the purpose.
Just like a bit details hidden in Quran. Would I be able to find a sign about a dark matter in Quran, for example?
No, absolutely not. There is no instance, zero example of the science of the Quran having ever led to a new scientific discovery. None whatsoever.
Why should it be?
It's not meant for that.
Yeah.
Just a question around, I suppose, a little bit of a group psychological question. Obviously, Islam grows it is the largest, one of the largest, number 1 and 2 in terms of the world. So clearly there's something within humanity that is incredibly attractive about Islam for humanity to kind of live by its principle and tenets and the creed. Is there something to be said about the fact that Islam gives incredible amounts of security and certainty, whether true or false, but it gives you certainty, which gives you safety, a sense of security. Whereas when you start exploring the scientific realms, you get liberty, which inevitably makes you insecure, which inevitably makes the world uncertain, and your place within it uncertain. And so that creates anxiety. So is there something to be said about that juxtapositional?
All religions, their followers seek security, and in that respect, Islam is not unique. But Islam is different in one very important sense. It's extremely simple. It tells you you do this and you don't do that. Something like Hinduism is very complex. My father used to explain Hinduism to me, and he spent a lot of time reading it and believing it, but he couldn't figure it out.
If I may, I think we believing are wrong here in saying Islam is the fastest growing religion. Islam is the fastest growing religion because Muslims are producing a lot of people at this time. They are multiplying, and there is economic reasons for that. It's poverty and ignorance. So don't tell me that Islam is growing because people are debating it philosophically and reaching conclusions. No, because an average Egyptian family is producing 12 people. If we open now the world population and we look at the increase of Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Egypt, we know you won't be able to follow it on the the clock will be, you won't be able to follow it, and that's the reason. Again, Christianity, the conservative Orthodox Christianity which exists in Ethiopia, is increasing very fast because Ethiopians are producing a phenomenal number of children. On the other hand, Anglicanism, which is in North Europe, an average family is producing 1 child, is decreasing.
China as well.
Sorry?
China as well.
And this is where we're fooling ourselves to say, subhanallah, Islam is the fastest growing religion. No, it's not. Muslims are multiplying very fast.
So the last question.
So, thank you so much for your time, for your talk today. So my question was really, so I have an interest and I have experience in the AI world and certainly within healthcare within that. So, and a lot of the developments in that field have come from the US, Europe, UK, parts of Canada, China, and a big part, especially in non-English speaking countries, is translation and such. What I try to understand and what I've tried to get my head around is why are non-English Muslim countries or non-English speaking Muslim communities not investing in translation houses, so to try to translate those papers across and hence to improve our contribution to the global kind of intellectual body. And kind of linked to that is going on what the gentleman's point was around Islamic ideas kind of standing by themselves. Muslims feel that Muslims are intellectually insecure, and we don't have the humility to say, actually, I don't have the answer to this, or actually, that isn't clear. I don't know from my scriptures or from the Quran or from Sunnah, I can't derive this. So, I guess in that, why do you think there's so much? Why is there a lack of intellectual humility, and why is there a lack of intellectual? What's the word? I noted it down here. Why are we intellectually insecure?
Yeah, the more you know, the more humble you become, and this is what all the great minds have said. The less you know, the more arrogant you grow, and so the point is to educate and get Muslims to know what others know, and to make them and to make the system of education that which exists in other countries. And now look, Vietnam and Hong Kong and China and Japan and on that side, and here Sweden and Norway, Denmark, UK. I mean, is there any real difference in the kinds of education that are given? No, they're all taught pretty much the same thing. You're taught geography the same way, you're taught physics, math, chemistry, biology, all in the same way. So once we normalize on that, then I think we'll be doing away with these extreme differences. The one last question, sir.
It's not a question, just a comment. I'm so glad I came. Your talk is very wide-ranging, very comprehensive, very thought-provoking, and I'm so happy.
Well, thank you.